Hello everybody. In this video, I'll talk about your company's investor value proposition, the single most important point of interaction you'll have with investors. But first, let me start with a short bit of my background to put some context about what I'll be sharing with you. I was a buy-side analyst in New York City for almost 20 years at two large natural resource investment funds, and at our peaks, we had billions of dollars under management. I've met hundreds of different management teams over thousands of marketing meetings, and I've also stayed very engaged with the generalists and the retail segments. My experiences have taught me how the different classes of investors think and what they need to hear in their investment processes. Because I've been around the industry for such a long time, I can also tell you that the investor pool you're talking to is changing at a pretty quick pace. Many of you are noticing it too. There's a large and growing segment of the investment community with a relative lack of investment and industry understanding of natural resources. Issues like index investing, the loss of specialist funds, and the movement of traditional retail markets to cannabis and technology have created a growing need to talk to the remaining pool of investors in a certain way. At Green Room Consultants, we're here to help you do that. And if you have a couple of minutes, take a look at some of the other videos I've put up, and hopefully they'll give you some insight into the investment community and how you should be talking to it. Okay, so let's talk about the investor value proposition. This single proposal is the fundamental reason why investors choose to invest their money in your company and not in one of their many other choices. Furthermore, an investor's clear understanding of the value proposition at all times is what makes your equity price the strongest at any point in time. But a misunderstanding of the value proposition often results in weakness and an unnecessary volatility. The problem for most management teams is that creating a value proposition is difficult. The reason it's difficult is because it requires assuming the role of the investor and not the role of the company's executive. On top of that, most people's personal experiences do not include being pitched investment ideas, so the concept is foreign to begin with. The best value propositions are multifaceted, interwoven arguments for both your industry and your company. Your goal should be to make it as simple and understandable as possible. Your value proposition may address the past if it demonstrates your company's strength, but it should always address the future. The future, after all, is why someone invests in the first place. I can't tell you how many times as an institutional investor that I was forced to create my own value proposition for a company because management sitting across the table either couldn't or wouldn't. If you think about it, the last thing you want is for an investor to be busy figuring out what your company is offering. If they're doing that, they're not listening to you. What you want is for that investor to take the value proposition you offer and compare it to his or her investment needs. And if there's a match, capital will be deployed. Your job is to make that decision as easy as possible, and that starts with an effective value proposition. Now, a situation I often come across is management's reluctance or inability to lay out the game plan for investors. And I'm not talking about a company's short-term plans here. An investor should never have to pull teeth to determine the company's end game. Understanding the end game is critical because you want an investor who will stay with you until you've hit that marker. That's really what defines a sticky investor, and that's the best kind of investor you can have, whether retail, generalist, or institutional. Along with stating the end game, you need to give investors some idea of the value you hope to create when you get there. In a world of fewer investors with a background or interest to make comparisons between companies, you have to do what you can to show them the ultimate value of what you hope to create. This isn't blue sky arm-waving promotionalism. Increasing numbers of investors need to literally be shown why they should be investing in your industry and in your company. This aspect of the investor value proposition must be as understandable and as concrete as possible, and a correctly picked analogy can really work well. Getting this right is really worth your time. So as an example, the meaning of saying, we want to be a mid-tier gold producer is completely lost on 95% of retail investors, and I'd bet on over 75% of generalist fund managers. Why limit your investor pool so radically by presenting investors with a value proposition that may have worked 20 years ago, but has been diminishing in its effectiveness ever since? Here's another example of what you shouldn't rely on for your company's value proposition. That's an analyst price target. Let's be honest, it's only getting more difficult to get coverage, and often the analysis won't be readily available to most investors anyway. For the retail investor in particular, you don't want a buy recommendation, particularly one that is based on relative outperformance expectations, to be the reason for investment. You want a thorough understanding of your value proposition to be the reason for buying your stock. You want that investor with you through the end game. The last thing you want is a flighty investor reacting to the latest recommendation, especially without an understanding of the sell side's methods or motives. Frankly, for this reason, you shouldn't rely on newsletter writers either. They have their followers, but those followers will always be a small subset of the investment community that's available to you. Now, there are many other examples of what not to do, but to keep the length of this video manageable, I'll end with some thoughts on how you should deliver your value proposition to investors. I've seen thousands of pitch books and marketing presentations, and I'll tell you that the most effective materials are no longer set up along the traditional lines developed by the sell side. And of course, that form is what's most commonly used. You have to understand that conventional wisdom and methods are increasingly ineffective because the traditional audience has shrunk and it's fundamentally changed. A lot of your audience now has neither the attention span nor the historical knowledge base or skills to piece together the parts of an implied value proposition. You must be explicit, repetitive, and very clear about the value you are planning to create. So to sum up, here's my green room value proposition. It takes a buy-side investor to understand what a buy-side investor needs to hear, and I was that buy-side investor for many years. My goal is to work with your company seamlessly at a very modest cost and to make your marketing efforts and messaging really resonate with today's active investors. There's no reason to limit the size of the capital pool you're addressing. I can help you talk with everybody in it. I'd love to explain more, so please reach out to me at the Green Room at 212-634-7881. Ask for Steve, and we'll have a great discussion. Thank you.